Hi, I'm Lisa Feldstein, and this presentation is all about egg donation in Canada. So a little about myself. I am a fertility lawyer located in Ontario, Canada, and for over a decade, I've been helping build their families through third-party reproduction, which includes egg donation. I give legal advice to intended parents or the recipients of eggs that are donated to them to build their family, and I give advice to egg donors who are donating their eggs to others. And so we're going to do an overview of some of the main things that are useful to know if you are embarking on an egg donation. So first, finding a donor. One way to find an egg donor is through an agency. We have agencies in Canada. There's a lot of benefits to using an agency. They can screen donors. They can ask some of the questions that you may not know to ask or don't feel comfortable asking. So they can contribute to that process of ensuring that people who are passing that first stage are hopefully a good fit. There can also be an access to a broader pool. If you're looking within your own personal network, it's hard to know as many people as would be willing to actually donate eggs, as opposed to an agency, which is going to be approached by potential donors. So there's just access to a bigger pool. And that can be particularly important if you don't know anyone in your life, you don't want to ask anyone in your life, or you're looking for something very particular. A lot of people want an egg donor that looks like them. And depending on what your friendship or family circle looks like, that might not be possible. And so agencies typically will have a bigger pool of people to choose from. They can also facilitate the reimbursements. Although you are not allowed to pay an egg donor in Canada, you can absolutely reimburse them. And there are many reimbursements that are very legitimate. Egg donors go through a lot. It's a surgical procedure. They take time off work. Money does change hands legitimately for those lawful expenses for which there's laws about that, receipts and paperwork and so forth. An agency can play that role. They can be the one that accepts the funds, sends it over to the donor, look at the receipts, and take you out of the process if it feels a bit uncomfortable to be playing that role. Agencies can also facilitate anonymous donation. Many people plan to be open with their child and their broader social circles that they are accepting donated eggs, but not everybody. And for those who prefer, for a variety of reasons, to have an anonymous donation, that's really hard to do if you're finding the donor yourself. You kind of, by definition, know each other. An egg donation agency can play the role of matchmaker without revealing identities. In those cases, they typically assign ID numbers, and that way everything is done using numbers, not names, and anonymity can be preserved. They can also allow for a happy medium, sometimes called an open ID or semi-anonymous agreement, where the parties don't actually know each other, but they do enter into a contract where they plan to exchange information and even consider the possibility of actually the donor meeting the child in the future. But the agency can play that middle role of passing along information and facilitating a future relationship. And of course, they can offer referrals and supports. And for some people, egg donation is scary and overwhelming, and having professionals hold your hand can be really nice and making sure that they can point you in the right direction. But if you're lucky enough to have friends and family, lots of people have sisters and cousins and so forth offer to donate eggs, and that can be really nice. It can feel special if there is a personal relationship or a genetic connection. The challenge, though, that can arise is confidentiality and thinking through what are the implications and who else knows, and is this child going to know or not know, and where all these pieces fit together to ensure that there's a situation where there's not surprises in the future, such as the child realizing everyone but them knows that they are donor conceived from their aunt's egg. So I find when it's a known relationship, it can be very special and there's a lot of trust, but the confidentiality piece requires a lot of consideration for how this is going to impact all the different individuals involved, and of course, especially the child-to-be. So donors have to go through significant screening. There's no do-it-yourself egg donation at home. Fertility clinics are required in order to remove eggs from the donor. So the clinics will require a variety of screening. This is really important to do before the contract. There's no point spending time and money going through a contract if you find out the donor doesn't pass the screening. So screening always comes first, and the clinic will guide you what is required and what they need from the donor in order to confirm that she passes the threshold and is given the green light to move ahead to the next step, which is typically counseling. So once the counseling happens, and that is a really important part to, again, ensure everybody's thinking carefully about what does it mean to donate your eggs to another person? How am I going to feel about that? If I'm the donor, how might I feel when I have my own kids if I don't? What might I tell my own kids? What is this relationship going to be? What does this mean? All of that to really help ensure that it's a psychologically healthy decision for everybody involved. Everybody feels good about it, that they don't feel pressured. So once medical screening and counseling are done, that brings us to the legal process. Thankfully, the legal process where I come in is the easy part. It's very linear. The intended parents or recipients will hire their own lawyer to give them advice and draft the donor agreement. That then gets sent off to the egg donor's lawyer. She has her own lawyer to avoid a conflict of interest. Her lawyer will advise her on her rights, explain the contract, ensure any promises that she's making are actually true, and discuss if there's any changes that she wants to see in the agreement. I find there are almost always changes. It's a collaborative process. It's not like this aggressive negotiation. It's important to ensure that the changes that she wants are made or discussed, and compromises are made as everybody feels good about, to ensure that everybody is actually bought into this plan. Because the point of the contract isn't to fight in court about it. It's to be used as a roadmap for what this relationship is going to look like. And of course, the clinics do need a contract. So you need it for that reason too. Otherwise, they typically won't proceed. So once the donor sends back her changes, the intended parents agree or ask their questions and make modifications as needed. Everybody signs. And the final step is the lawyer for the intended parents will send a letter to the fertility clinic, often called the clearance letter, explaining the contract has been signed. Everyone received legal advice. You're good to go. And the goal is always to have that done before the egg donor begins taking her medications. Although it's really rare to see these deals fall apart, if a donor picks up medications and starts taking them and the deal falls apart, that is a very, very expensive situation for intended parents, because they will have paid a fortune for medications and everything else to not be able to proceed with the retrieval. So it's really, really important that this agreement be signed before a donor begins medications, as a way to save a lot of money, stress, and heartache. So the intake process, the lawyer for the donors will be asking a variety of questions like, what are you going to do with the eggs when you're done with them? Often they're fertilized right away and there's embryos, but what do you want to do? What is the donor willing to consent to? Will these embryos be destroyed, donated to research, donated to somebody else? What's the relationship in the future going to look like? Does the donor want to know when a child is born? Do you want to know if the donor donates again? And if so, information about her own children or other offspring from donations. So the beginning is really figuring out, what does this relationship look like, primarily in terms of information sharing. And of course, the reimbursements. At the independent legal advice stage, the donor, as I mentioned before, will go through the agreement with her lawyer, and the lawyer for the donor will often ask questions, should ask questions about, have you donated before, and what promises did you make to other families? Because there's this web that is sort of connecting different contracts. If a donor donates one time and then another time, she may have made promises to past intended parents, which means this could affect you. If you're looking for a donor and she has donated anonymously in the past, she might not be able to give you the name of all children born from her DNA. So if that's something that's important, that you know every child out there genetically connected to yours, finding out at the beginning if she donated anonymously might be a deal breaker for you. Likewise, she may have donated, but she might not have permission to share information. So this is something that can make sense to canvass right at the beginning, before you're even really into the contract stage. And then, is she understanding the reimbursements? Is she agreeable? Is she going to be is it going to be so expensive that it's not feasible to pay her back? For example, if a donor has to fly from British Columbia to Ontario and take 2 weeks off work, well, what is her wage during that time? And can that be afforded? And all of these little pieces about reimbursements will get discussed at the contract stage and fleshed out in detail, so everybody is in agreement before moving forward. And then when the contract is signed, generally in Ontario, we are signing electronically. This might vary province to province. Signed, clearance letter sent to the clinic, and off everybody goes. I do sometimes get concerned that people will forget their commitments, so it's a really good idea to think about, where are you going to save this contract? How are you going to ensure that you remember what you've committed to, such as providing updated information to the clinic if your address or phone number changes. So thinking through, not just now the contract is done, but this is a lifelong commitment in many cases. What steps are you going to take to ensure that you are all actually honoring it into the future? So some final words of wisdom. While relatives do often donate, and that can be wonderful, thinking through how that is going to make everybody feel. This is where counseling can be incredibly important to really confirm it's a good fit for everybody to have a donation occur within a family. And then the confidentiality. Multiple contracts, thinking through, is a donor making so many promises to many families that she may not remember a promise to you because it's just too much to keep track of, or might be in a possible situation of breaching contracts and having to navigate that. So having it on your radar if a donor has donated multiple times, what information you want to be entitled to, and whether that's realistic if there's a history of many past donations. And counseling, I know I've mentioned it a few times, but it's really quite important in helping ensure that people feel good about their decisions and they are all on the same page for this really big decision of donating eggs to another person or couple and receiving eggs from a donor. So I hope that has been helpful information in your process to decide about whether to or how to embark on egg donation. My name again is Lisa Feldstein, and I wish you the best of luck with your journey.